Lisette woke up feeling a strange unease, only to discover her worst fear. Her husband Dash had been leading a double life, cheating on her and planning to leave with his mistress. Shattered but determined, she stood her ground, refusing to be thrown out of their shared home. As Dash tried to humiliate her, fate took an unexpected turn. Years later, when he returned to flaunt his success, Lisette's transformation left him in shock. He never anticipated the strength, independence, and happiness she had gained in his absence. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. Before we dive into this story, please let me know in the comments where you're watching from. The bad husband sold his half of the house and ran off with his mistress, but when he returned, eager to humiliate his ex-wife, the sight of her stopped him in his tracks, leaving him utterly stunned. That fateful morning, Lisette woke with a heavy, sinking feeling deep in her chest, a gnawing unease she couldn't shake. Dash, the man she had once trusted with her heart, was absent, as he had been more and more often lately. The silence in the house felt suffocating, a hollow, bitter silence that had become her companion in his growing absence. Each time he claimed to be working late, the emptiness echoed louder, his excuses more transparent, his betrayal cutting deeper. As she moved through her morning routine, every step felt heavier than the last. The weight of what she needed to say pressed down on her, constricting her heart. They had worked hard, saved for what was supposed to be their future, a home, a dream. But something had shifted, and now the very ground beneath her feet felt unstable. She wanted to make sure that the apartment, the symbol of their partnership, was legally shared, a testament to the equality they once claimed to believe in. Yet deep down, she feared she knew where Dash's loyalties now lay. When he finally entered the kitchen, his face was cold and distant, avoiding her gaze as if the very sight of her repulsed him. Lisette's stomach churned as she tried to keep her voice steady. "Dash, we need to talk," she said, her heart hammering in her chest. But he just stood there, staring blankly at the cup of coffee she had placed before him, as if hoping the conversation would disappear. About what he muttered, still refusing to meet her eyes. "The apartment," she said, her voice firmer now. "I want it registered in both of our names. We both put in equally, and I think it's only fair." He finally looked at her, a flicker of irritation flashing across his face. "Why complicate things, Lisette? It's unnecessary. We're a family. What's mine is yours." Her pulse quickened, frustration and fury mixing with a newfound resolve. She wasn't backing down. "Not this time. If that's truly how you feel, then there shouldn't be a problem registering it in both our names, unless there's something else you're hiding from me." His face darkened, his irritation giving way to shock. He hadn't expected her to fight back, not like this. "There's no need to spend extra money on something so trivial," he shot back, grasping for control, the strain in his voice betraying him. Lisette's gaze never wavered. Her voice cut through the tension like a blade. "We can easily save on other things like the money you waste on beer." If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 1 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. Dash opened his mouth, but no words came. He stood there blindsided by her strength, the woman he once thought he could manipulate and control. This wasn't the passive, compliant wife he had grown accustomed to. His frustration was palpable, but more than that, it was the realization that the power he held over her was slipping away. "I don't understand why you're acting like this," Lisette, he said, his voice lower now, almost pleading but dripping with frustration. "Because I'm done being voiceless, Dash," she replied, the conviction in her words filling the room with a force he could no longer deny. "I'm done living in the shadows of your decisions. Things are going to change." For the first time in their marriage, Dash was speechless, his grip on the situation crumbling. He left the room, muttering something incoherent, while Lisette stood there, her heart racing with fear, yet glowing with the fiery taste of newfound freedom. That night, as Lisette prepared for bed, she couldn't help but replay the events of the day in her mind. The confrontation with Dash had been draining, but beneath the exhaustion, there was something new, something she hadn't felt in years, a flicker of hope. She knew that this was only the beginning of a difficult journey, one where every step would test her courage, her patience, and her ability to hold on to herself in the face of Dash's manipulations. The air in the room felt heavy with the weight of the unspoken battle that now lay ahead, but despite the tension, there was also a growing sense of liberation. The silence of the house, once a suffocating reminder of her loneliness, now felt like a refuge. As she sat on the edge of the bed, her fingers tracing the familiar grooves of the worn quilt, She reflected on the strength she had shown earlier. Standing up to Dash hadn't been easy. It had taken every ounce of her willpower to keep her voice steady, to refuse to back down in the face of his thinly veiled anger. Yet for the first time in a long while, she had felt her power, a power she had long believed had been stripped away by years of compromise and silence. Lizette sighed deeply as she slipped under the covers, feeling the cool fabric against her skin. The knot in her stomach had loosened slightly, replaced by a strange sense of calm. She had taken a step, a small but significant one, toward reclaiming her place in her own life. The apartment, once just a physical structure, had become a symbol of everything she had sacrificed, everything she had poured into their relationship, and now it was also the battleground for her fight for equality. As she lay down, she stared at the ceiling, her thoughts racing but her body unusually still. She knew the road ahead was going to be fraught with challenges. Dash wasn't the type of man to relinquish control easily, and the idea of her standing up to him had shaken him. His dominance had always been a constant in their marriage, and for so long, she had allowed herself to shrink, to become smaller, just to keep the peace. But now the peace no longer felt worth the price. She could feel the slow burn of defiance igniting within her, and she wasn't about to let it be extinguished. Beside her, Dash stirred restlessly, his sleep disturbed by the events of the evening. She could hear his soft murmurs and the occasional shift in the sheets as he tossed and turned. The man who had once seemed so solid, so unshakable, was now clearly unsettled, his sense of control slipping through his fingers. Lizette watched him for a moment, a mixture of emotions swirling in her chest: sadness for what had been lost, anger for the ways he had belittled and dismissed her, but also a quiet triumph. He hadn't expected this from her, and that realization brought her a strange sense of peace. As Dash lay beside her, tormented by the unraveling of his power, Lizette allowed herself to dream of a future where she would no longer be silenced. A future where her needs, her voice, would be just as important as his. She drifted into sleep, her heart lighter than it had been in years, as if the act of standing up for herself had released her from a cage she hadn't even realized she was in. The next morning, Lizette woke with a mix of trepidation and clarity. The conversation from the night before still hung heavy in the air, but she was no longer weighed down by doubt. She needed support, a lifeline to help her navigate this new, uncertain terrain. Without hesitation, she reached for her phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed Sully's number. Sully, her dearest friend, had always been the one person she could count on to be both a source of wisdom and unwavering support. After a few rings, Sully's familiar voice came through the receiver. "Lizette, it's been too long. What's going on?" Even over the phone, Sully's warmth was palpable, and Lizette immediately felt a surge of relief. They arranged to meet at a cafe near Lizette's house, a place they had frequented countless times over the years. As Lizette made her way to the cafe, her mind raced with thoughts of how to explain the situation. Her feet felt heavy, her breath shallow, and she could feel the tension building in her shoulders. She wasn't just dealing with a marital dispute. This was the beginning of a much larger reckoning. Dash had been dominating their marriage for far too long, and the thought of confronting him head-on terrified her. But she also knew she couldn't keep living like this. When Lizette arrived at the cafe, Sully was already seated at their usual table in the corner, a steaming cup of coffee in front of her. Sully's smile was immediate and genuine, and as soon as Lizette saw her, she felt her anxiety begin to ease. Lizette Sully's eyes lit up as she stood to embrace her friend. "It's so good to see you. You look like you've got a lot on your mind. What's going on?" Lizette sat down, the familiar comfort of the cafe washing over her as she wrapped her hands around the warm cup of coffee that Sully had already ordered for her. For a moment, she just sat in silence, trying to gather her thoughts. Then, with a deep breath, she began to speak. "Sully, I don't even know where to begin. Things with Dash, they've been bad for a while now, and last night we had a huge argument about the apartment." As she spoke, Lizette could feel the emotions bubbling to the surface: frustration, sadness, anger, and a deep sense of betrayal. She poured it all out to Sully, not holding anything back. Sully listened intently, her eyes never leaving Lizette's face, her expression a mixture of concern and quiet resolve. She didn't interrupt, allowing Lizette the space to release everything she had been holding inside. When Lizette finally finished, she sat back in her chair, exhausted but relieved. Sully, who had been silently absorbing every word, reached across the table and took Lizette's hand. "Lizette, what you're doing is not only brave, it's essential. You can't keep letting Dash walk all over you. You have the right to be heard, and to be treated as an equal. You deserve so much more than this." Lizette felt a lump rise in her throat. She had known these things deep down, but hearing them from someone else made them real. "I know you're right," Sully, she said softly, her voice trembling. "But it's so hard. Dash has always been the one in control, and I've let him. I've been so afraid of what would happen if I stood up to him." Sully squeezed her hand, her voice firm but full of compassion. "I understand, Lizette, but you are so much stronger than you realize. You've spent too long letting him make you feel small, but you're not small. You have a voice, and it deserves to be heard. It's time to stop letting him silence you." Lizette nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm just so tired of feeling like I don't matter, like my opinions, my contributions don't count." Sully's grip on her hand tightened. "You do matter. And it's time to show Dash that you won't be pushed aside anymore. You're not alone in this. I'm here for you every step of the way." The warmth and strength in Sully's words resonated deep within Lizette, filling her with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. She wasn't just fighting for an apartment or equality in her marriage, she was fighting for herself, for her dignity and self-worth. And for the first time, she truly believed that she could win this battle. As they sat together in the cafe, the sounds of life moving around them, Lizette felt a shift within herself. The fear was still there, but it no longer felt like an insurmountable force. She had her friend, she had her inner strength, and most importantly, she had her voice. The road ahead would be long and hard, but she was no longer afraid to walk it. She was ready to fight for the life she deserved, one where she would no longer be silenced, where her voice would finally be heard. Lizette's heart shattered at the confession, her worst fears confirmed in the span of a single sentence. The room seemed to close in on her, the walls pressing in as her breath caught in her throat. For a moment she felt numb, unable to process the magnitude of what Dash had just said. His words echoed in her mind. "I'm tired of us." Each word was a dagger, driving deeper into the core of her being. But even through the overwhelming pain, something inside Lizette stirred an ember of the strength she had discovered within herself over the past few weeks. This was the moment she had dreaded, and in some ways the moment she had known was inevitable. Yet here she was, standing face to face with the truth, and she was still standing. The silence stretched between them, heavy and thick, until finally Lizette spoke, her voice trembling but firm. "After everything we've been through, after everything I've sacrificed, you're tired. You think you can just walk away after destroying everything we built together." Dash, avoiding her eyes, ran his hand through his hair, frustration seeping into his expression. "Lizette, it hasn't been working for a long time. I didn't plan for this to happen, but it did. I don't know what to say." The rage Lizette had kept buried began to rise, fierce and fiery, overwhelming the sorrow. "You didn't plan for this to happen. You've been lying to me, hiding things from me, and seeing another woman behind my back. That wasn't an accident, Dash. That was a choice you made over and over again." Dash shifted uncomfortably, clearly unprepared for the confrontation. "I didn't mean for it to get this far. I wasn't happy, Lizette." "Wasn't happy," Lizette repeated, her voice rising, her emotions swirling into a storm. "And you think I was? You think I haven't felt the distance, the coldness, the emptiness in this house? I've been fighting for us, trying to make this work, but you just gave up without even telling me. You didn't even give me the chance to fix things." Dash sighed, his voice hardening, frustration now coloring his words. "Fix things? Lizette, we've been broken for a long time. You just didn't want to see it. I'm done pretending." Lizette's hands clenched into fists at her sides, the sting of his words almost too much to bear. But she wasn't going to let him reduce their life together to a careless dismissal. She wasn't going to let him rewrite their history as if it meant nothing. "You're done pretending," she said, her voice thick with anger and heartbreak. "You're the one who's been pretending, Dash. You pretended to be committed to this marriage while sneaking around with someone else. You pretended everything was fine while leaving me in the dark. You're a coward. You're a coward." Dash flinched at the word, but he didn't deny it. Instead, he sat down on the edge of the couch, rubbing his temples as if trying to soothe an unseen ache. "Maybe I am," he admitted quietly. "Maybe I am a coward." For a moment, the weight of his confession hung in the air. The man she had once loved, the man she had built a life with, was sitting in front of her, admitting to his flaws. But it brought no comfort. It didn't change the betrayal, the lies, or the pain. Lizette felt the tears welling up in her eyes, but she blinked them back, refusing to let them fall. She had cried enough over Dash, for both of them. Now wasn't the time for tears. Now was the time for clarity. "I deserve better than this," she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion but unwavering in its truth. "I deserve someone who fights for me, for us. And you've made it clear where you stand." Dash looked up at her, his expression unreadable, as if he was finally seeing the strength in her that he had taken for granted for so long. "I never wanted to hurt you," he said softly, but his words rang hollow. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 2 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. "You didn't just hurt me," Lizette replied, her voice steady, despite the quiver in her chest. "You broke me. But I'm done being broken. I'm done being the one who carries the weight of this marriage while you check out and run off with someone else. If you're tired of us, then I'm done with you." The finality of her words echoed in the room, and for the first time, Dash had nothing to say. He sat there, staring at the floor, as if the reality of his actions was finally sinking in. But for Lizette, there was no turning back. With slow, deliberate steps, she gathered the documents from the coffee table, her hands shaking only slightly. She knew what she had to do. She had reached the point where staying in this marriage would only mean losing herself. And after everything, she couldn't let that happen. Not anymore. "Tomorrow," she said, her voice calm and controlled, "I'm going to see a lawyer. I'm filing for divorce." Dash looked up, shock flickering across his face. He opened his mouth to speak, but Lizette raised her hand, stopping him. "I don't want to hear it, Dash. You've made your choices. Now, I'm making mine." With that, she turned and walked toward the bedroom, her heart heavy but her spirit unbroken. The finality of the decision settled over her like a cloak, but it wasn't suffocating, it was freeing. She had spent too long in the shadows of someone else's decisions, too long letting herself be diminished by a man who didn't see her worth. That night, as she lay in bed, the pain was still there, raw and aching, but there was something else too, a sense of peace. She had chosen herself. For the first time in a long while, she had put her own needs, her dignity, above the man who had taken her for granted. And in that choice, there was power. Lizette didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time in years, she felt like it was hers to shape. With Sully's unwavering support and the strength she had rediscovered within herself, she knew she could face whatever came next. The road would be long, and the wounds would take time to heal. But Lizette was no longer afraid. She was ready to step into the unknown, unburdened by the weight of Dash's lies, and finally live a life where her voice was heard. In the quiet of the night, Lizette closed her eyes, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to dream of a future where she was truly free. The confession hit like a hammer, shattering Lizette's fragile hopes and leaving her feeling exposed and vulnerable. But she refused to let the tears fall. This was not the moment to break down, this was the moment to fight back. "How could you?" Lizette's voice trembled but remained steady. "After everything we've been through, after everything I've sacrificed for us, how could you betray me like this?" Dash didn't meet her eyes, his gaze fixed on some invisible spot on the carpet, as if looking directly at her might force him to confront the weight of his actions. "This isn't working, Lizette," he muttered, his voice cold and detached. "I want you to leave the apartment. I want to start over with Laura." Lizette's heart clenched at the mention of the other woman, but she stood her ground. She had been preparing for this moment, and now was not the time to falter. "I'm not going anywhere, Dash," she replied, her voice low but resolute. "This apartment is as much mine as it is yours. You can't just throw me out because you found someone new to occupy your time." Dash finally looked up, and the frustration etched into his face was unmistakable. His eyes burned with a mix of anger and impatience. "And what do you plan to do?" he snapped. "Fight me for every inch of this place. For what? To prolong the inevitable." "If that's what it takes," Lizette said, her determination glinting in her eyes. "I'm not going to let you toss me aside like I'm nothing. I've built a life here. I've built this with you, and I won't let you erase me from it because you've decided to move on." "Manipulate me anymore," Dash interrupted, his voice rising as his temper flared. "You think this is about manipulation? I'm done, Lizette. I'm done with the arguments, the cold silences, the pretending. You can't fix this. I can't fix this. It's over." For a moment, the two stood there, staring at each other, the tension between them almost tangible. Then, with a frustrated growl, Dash stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. Lizette stood frozen in place, her emotions swirling into a chaotic storm inside her chest. The confrontation had ended abruptly, leaving her alone with her thoughts. She sank onto the sofa, her body heavy with exhaustion. The weight of the conversation pressed down on her, but amid the pain, there was also a strange sense of relief. She had stood her ground. She had not crumbled beneath the pressure of Dash's demands. For the first time in a long time, Lizette felt like she had taken back some control over her life. That night, as she lay alone in bed, the silence of the house felt different, less oppressive, more like a clean slate. Lizette thought about the days to come, about the difficult choices that still lay ahead. She knew this wasn't over. Dash wasn't going to back down easily. But she also knew that she had the strength to face whatever came next. With Sully's unwavering support and the determination she had rediscovered within herself, Lizette was ready to fight for her dignity, for her home, and most importantly, for herself. When dawn broke, it brought with it a new clarity. The light streaming through the windows seemed brighter, almost hopeful. Lizette knew that there was still so much to face, that the path forward would be rocky and fraught with challenges. But she also knew that she wouldn't let those obstacles defeat her. She was determined now more than ever to stand her ground, to fight for what she deserved. The following days were tense. The house was thick with unspoken resentment, and every interaction with Dash was laced with bitterness. They barely exchanged words, and when they did, their conversations were sharp and cutting, like two adversaries locked in a battle neither could win. Lizette knew that this standoff couldn't last forever, but she wasn't ready to back down. One afternoon, as Lizette was preparing dinner, she heard Dash's footsteps approaching the kitchen. There was a seriousness in his gait, a finality that made her stomach twist. When she turned to face him, she saw the determination in his expression. Something had shifted. "Lizette," Dash said, his tone firm, leaving no room for argument. "We need to talk." Lizette felt her heart begin to race, but she forced herself to remain calm. "About what?" Dash took a deep breath, his jaw tightening before he spoke. "About us. About what happens now." Lizette put down the knife she had been holding, crossing her arms as if to protect herself from what she knew was coming. "Go on," she said, bracing for the worst. "We can't keep living like this," Dash began, his voice low and tense. "I've made a decision. I want you to move out of the apartment." The words felt like a slap to Lizette's face, but she remained standing, her spine straight, her resolve unshaken. "I've already told you, Dash. I'm not leaving. This apartment is as much mine as it is yours." Dash's frustration was palpable. His fists clenched at his sides as he took a step closer, his voice rising. "You can't stay here, Lizette. It's not healthy for either of us. I've been seeing Laura, and I want to move forward with her." A sharp, stinging pain shot through Lizette's chest at his words, but she quickly swallowed the emotion. She wasn't going to let him see her break. "So what?" she demanded, her voice trembling with indignation. "You think you can just discard me like yesterday's news? You think you can erase me from your life and move on like I never existed?" "That's not what I'm saying," Dash retorted, but the frustration in his tone betrayed him. "But we can't keep pretending this marriage works. It's over, Lizette." Lizette's anger surged, her heart pounding in her ears. "And you think the solution is to just kick me out of my own home, to walk away without a fight? I'm not going to let you do that, Dash." Dash's face darkened with frustration. "And what do you suggest we do then? We can't keep living together like this. It's toxic." "Egg." Lizette stared at him, her emotions a whirlwind of rage, sadness, and determination. "We're not going to live together," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "But I'm not leaving this apartment, and I'm not going to let you bully me into disappearing from my own life. We'll figure something out, Dash, but I'm staying." The finality in her voice silenced him. For a moment, Dash seemed to weigh his options, his expression shifting from anger to resignation. He had pushed her, but she had pushed back harder than he expected. Finally, with a heavy sigh, he turned and walked out of the kitchen without another word, leaving Lizette standing alone, her heart still racing. She stood there for a long moment, her mind racing. She knew this wasn't over. Dash wasn't going to give up easily, but neither was she. She had come too far, fought too hard to reclaim her sense of self, to let him take that from her now. As the evening wore on, Lizette felt the familiar weight of uncertainty settles over her, but it was tempered by the knowledge that she was no longer powerless. She had found her voice, and with it, the strength to stand up for herself even against the man who had once held all the power in their relationship. That night, as she lay in bed, the house felt quieter than usual. but it no longer felt oppressive. The silence was no longer suffocating, it was a space for her to think, to plan, to prepare for whatever would come next. The future was still uncertain, but Lizette knew one thing for sure: she would not let anyone, least of all Dash, strip her of the life she deserved. In the stillness of the night, as she closed her eyes, Lizette felt a sense of calm wash over her. She was ready to fight, and this time she wasn't fighting just for her home, she was fighting for herself. Lizette held Dash's gaze, her voice calm but unwavering. "You could leave. If you want to be with Laura so much, then go live with her. I'm not going anywhere." Dash blinked, clearly surprised by her boldness, as if the possibility of him being the one to leave had never crossed his mind. For years, he had always held the power in their relationship, and now the suggestion threw him off balance. "And what about the apartment?" he asked, still trying to maintain control, though the cracks were beginning to show. "We'll sell it," Lizette said, her voice cool and resolute. "We'll split whatever we get, and we'll move on with our lives separately." For a moment, Dash seemed to consider her words, his eyes narrowing as if trying to figure out how to twist the situation back in his favor. But Lizette stood firm, her expression unyielding. Slowly, Dash nodded, though his jaw clenched with barely concealed frustration. "Fine, we'll sell it. But I want you to know I'm not going to make this easy for you, Lizette." "I never thought you would," Lizette replied coldly, her gaze unwavering. The war between them was far from over, but she was ready for the battle. She had already weathered the storm of his betrayal, and now she was prepared to face whatever came next. The following weeks were a whirlwind of preparations, emotions running high as both Lizette and Dash maneuvered through the logistics of the apartment sale. Lizette threw herself into the process, arranging meetings with real estate agents, sorting through paperwork, and ensuring everything was in order. Every day was a reminder of the life she was leaving behind, but it was also a chance to reclaim her independence. Dash, on the other hand, was increasingly absent. His nights were spent with Laura, no longer bothering to hide his infidelity. While his absence left a hollow quiet in the apartment, it also brought Lizette a sense of relief. She no longer had to endure his presence, the sharp words, and the lingering resentment. The distance between them only confirmed what she had known for a long time: this chapter of her life was closing, and a new one was beginning. One afternoon, as Lizette sat in the living room sorting through documents, her phone rang. It was her real estate agent. She answered, hoping for good news. "Lizette, I have some good news," the agent said, her voice warm. "I've found a buyer for Dash's half of the apartment." Lizette felt a wave of relief wash over her. "Really?" "That's great," she replied, already feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. "Who's the buyer?" The agent hesitated for a moment, as if unsure how Lizette would react. "It's a man named Luke. I believe he's someone from your past." Lizette's heart skipped a beat at the name. Luke. The memories came flooding back: high school, laughter, shared secrets. Luke had been one of her closest friends back then, a boy who had always been there for her, who had looked at her with an affection she hadn't been ready to understand. The idea that he was now entering her life again, just as she was freeing herself from Dash, brought an unexpected sense of hope. "Luke," she repeated, her voice soft with surprise. I wasn't expecting that." "It seems like fate," the agent said with a light laugh. "He seems genuinely interested in the property. I'll send over the details and we can move forward from there." Lizette thanked her and hung up, her mind spinning. The sale of the apartment felt like a turning point, but the fact that it was Luke, someone from her past, someone who had cared about her, added a layer of meaning she hadn't anticipated. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 3 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. That night, as Lizette lay in bed, her thoughts lingered on the future. The sale of the apartment would be the first step toward cutting ties with Dash for good, a symbolic end to the life they had built together and the beginning of something new. And now, with Luke reappearing in her life, the future didn't seem as bleak as it once had. It felt like the universe was offering her a chance to start over, to rebuild, and to rediscover parts of herself that had been buried for too long. As she prepared for bed, Lizette felt a sense of calm she hadn't felt in months. The pain of Dash's betrayal was still there, but it no longer defined her. She had faced one of the hardest moments of her life and had emerged stronger and more determined. The road ahead was still uncertain, but Lizette knew she had the strength to walk it. She had Sully's unwavering support, and now, perhaps, Luke's as well. But more than that, she had herself, her courage, her resilience, and the knowledge that she was capable of fighting for her happiness. The following days flew by as the details of the sale were finalized. Dash continued to drift in and out of the apartment, his presence a fading shadow in her life. Each time he left, Lizette felt lighter, more in control. She no longer dreaded his return or the sharp exchanges that often followed. Instead, she focused on the future, on the life she was about to reclaim. One evening, after another long day of preparations, Lizette sat in the living room, sipping tea as she looked out at the city lights. Her phone buzzed with a message from Luke. "Looking forward to seeing the apartment tomorrow. It's been a long time, Lizette. I'm glad our paths are crossing again." Lizette smiled, a warmth spreading through her chest. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful. She was ready to face whatever came next, knowing that no matter what, she was in control of her destiny. That night, as she slipped into bed, Lizette allowed herself to dream of new beginnings, of freedom, of a life filled with the happiness and peace she had so long deserved. She was no longer tied to the past, no longer burdened by the weight of a broken marriage. The future was hers to shape, and she was ready to embrace it fully. The next morning, Lizette woke with a sense of purpose. The day of the apartment show had arrived, and with it, the promise of a fresh start. As she prepared herself, she thought of Dash and the chapter she was finally closing. But she also thought of Luke, of the possibilities that lay ahead. The pieces of her life were falling into place, and for the first time, she felt truly free. When the time came to meet Luke at the apartment, Lizette stood tall, ready to face whatever the future held. She knew that no matter what happened, she had already won. She had reclaimed her life, her dignity, and her strength. And that, more than anything, was the beginning of the happiness and peace she had long sought. As she greeted Luke at the door, her heart filled with hope. "Welcome back," she said with a smile, knowing that this was the start of something new. As Dash walked away for the last time, Lizette felt an overwhelming sense of closure and release. The weight of their painful past, the years of hurt, the betrayal, it all seemed to dissolve with each step he took. She realized she was finally free, not just from Dash, but from the resentment and bitterness that had clouded her heart for so long. With the past firmly behind her, she could now look toward the future with hope and a renewed sense of purpose. That evening, while sharing a quiet dinner with Luke at her cozy apartment, Lizette couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come. She looked across the table at the man who had re-entered her life unexpectedly, but at just the right time. The warmth of his presence and the simplicity of the moment filled her with a deep sense of gratitude. She had weathered the storm of her broken marriage and found not just love again, but also a new life that felt authentic and full of promise. "To think," Lizette said, smiling softly at Luke, "there was a time I couldn't imagine feeling this peaceful, but now it feels like everything is falling into place." Luke reached for her hand across the table, his eyes filled with admiration. "You've come so far, Lizette. You've fought for your happiness, and now it's all paying off. I'm so proud of you." The journey had been tough, no doubt, but every difficult step had led Lizette to where she was now stronger, more confident, and ready to embrace a future she had never dared to dream of before. The coffee and letter shop she had opened after the sale of the apartment had blossomed into something truly special. It had not only become a thriving business, but also a gathering place for the local community. People came to read, to connect, to enjoy a good cup of coffee in the warm, inviting atmosphere she had created. One afternoon, as Lizette was organizing the bookshelves at the shop, the phone rang. Wiping her hands on her apron, she answered, expecting it to be a customer or supplier. Instead, it was a call from the university she had left many years ago, back when life's demands had forced her to abandon her studies. "Ms. Lizette, I'm calling to inform you that you've been selected to receive a scholarship based on your past academic record and your dedication over the years," the administrator explained. Lizette froze in surprise, her heart skipping a beat. A scholarship. Returning to school had been a dream she had long since set aside, thinking it was impossible with everything else going on in her life. But now, here was the opportunity she had always wanted, practically falling into her lap. "Thank you so much," she stammered, still in disbelief. "This means the world to me." That evening, as she sat across from Luke at dinner, her face glowed with excitement. "Luke, you won't believe it, I've been granted a scholarship to finish my degree." Luke's face lit up, his smile as wide as hers. "That's incredible, Lizette. I knew something amazing was going to happen to you. I'm so proud of you," he said, pulling her into a tight embrace. With Luke's support, Lizette began planning her return to university. She carefully organized her schedule so that she could attend classes while still managing the coffee shop. Luke, always her steady rock, offered to cover more hours at the business, ensuring she had the time and energy to focus on her studies. The first few weeks back in school were both challenging and exhilarating. Lizette was surrounded by young students and professors who were passionate about their subjects, and every lecture filled her with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. Her confidence grew with each passing day as she successfully navigated her coursework and found herself thriving in an environment she had once feared she'd never return to. One particularly intense afternoon, after a grueling finance class, Lizette decided to grab a coffee at the campus cafe to review her notes. As she sat quietly sipping her drink, she noticed an older woman at a nearby table, engrossed in a book. Something about her seemed familiar, and after a moment, it clicked. "Excuse me," Lizette said as she approached the woman. "Are you Professor Herschel?" The woman looked up from her book, her eyes soft and curious. "Yes, I am." "Do we know each other?" Lizette smiled warmly. "I'm Lizette. You were my professor many years ago before I had to leave the university. I just wanted to thank you for everything you taught me." A wide smile spread across Professor Herschel's face. "Lizette, of course I remember you. It's wonderful to see you again. How have you been?" Sitting down beside her former professor, Lizette shared her story, the hardships she had faced, the opening of her shop, and now her return to school. Professor Herschel listened intently, nodding along, clearly impressed by Lizette's resilience. "You are an extraordinary woman," Lizette, Professor Herschel said, her voice filled with admiration. "Your journey hasn't been easy, but you've turned every challenge into an opportunity. I'm so proud of you for returning to your studies and for building a life that brings you joy." Lizette felt a surge of pride at her professor's words. Hearing someone she had admired for so long acknowledge her strength was deeply affirming. "Thank you," Lizette said softly. "I've had a lot of help along the way, but I've also realized that I'm stronger than I ever gave myself credit for." As the conversation continued, Lizette couldn't help but feel a deep sense of fulfillment. She had faced her past, conquered her fears, and found love and purpose in ways she hadn't imagined possible. The once broken and lost woman who had been trapped in an unhappy marriage had transformed into someone who embraced life fully. That night, as Lizette and Luke shared a quiet dinner once again, she reflected on how far she had come. She had a thriving business, a supportive partner, and a bright future filled with possibility. And for the first time in a long time, she truly believed she deserved it all. The past was no longer a burden, it was a stepping stone. The future, once uncertain and daunting, was now filled with hope, love, and endless possibilities. As Lizette looked into Luke's eyes, she knew that no matter what came next, she was ready for it. She had not only rebuilt her life, she had rediscovered herself. Professor Herschel's words didn't just echo in Lizette's mind, they reverberated in the deepest corners of her heart, stirring emotions she hadn't felt in a long time. It was as if his belief in her unlocked something profound within a reservoir of untapped potential and a burning desire to prove not just to the world, but to herself, that she was capable of greatness. The validation she received from someone she deeply admired made her feel invincible, as though 1,000 invisible hands were lifting her and pushing her forward. Every day from that moment on, Lizette's motivation blazed brighter, filling her with an unshakable sense of purpose. She walked with renewed energy, her spirit revitalized as she balanced the rigorous demands of her academic life and her responsibilities at the shop. In the beginning, finding that balance had seemed like an insurmountable challenge. Nights blurred into early mornings, and moments of peace were rare and fleeting. But with this new flame of determination burning within her, Lizette found herself carving out a rhythm, a balance between her studies and the shop that felt natural and deeply fulfilling. The lessons she absorbed in her classes didn't stay confined to the classroom. She carried them with her into every decision she made at the shop. Managing the business became less about the day-to-day tasks and more about innovation, about implementing the strategic principles she was learning, infusing new life into coffee and letters. Her confidence swelled with each passing day, as did her ability to face whatever challenges crossed her path with grace and intellect. Through it all, Luke remained a steadfast presence at her side, his quiet strength and unwavering support a constant source of comfort and encouragement. Luke wasn't just a partner to Lizette, he was her rock, the anchor that kept her steady even when the weight of her responsibilities seemed overwhelming. His words, always spoken with warmth and love, wrapped around her like a protective shield. Whenever she began to doubt herself, It was Luke who reminded her of her worth, of her brilliance, and of how far she had already come. His belief in her was a steady light that guided her through the darkest moments. One particularly long night, after a day that had stretched her thin between her studies and the demands of the shop, Lizette and Luke retreated to their cozy, private library. The familiar scent of old books mixed with the comforting aroma of freshly brewed tea filled the room as they settled into their favorite chairs. The soft crackling of the fireplace the only sound in the peaceful silence between them. It was a moment of pure tranquility, a rare pause in their otherwise bustling lives. "Do you realize how far we've come?" Luke's voice broke the silence, gentle and filled with awe, as he gazed at her with eyes full of admiration. Lizette looked back at him, her heart swelling with emotion. "Yes," she replied, her voice soft but brimming with the depth of her feelings. "And it's all because of our relentless effort, our commitment, and our love. I've never felt this fulfilled before, Luke. I've never been this happy." He reached across the small table, his fingers intertwining with hers. The warmth of his touch sent a wave of peace through her, grounding her in the moment. "And this," Luke said, his voice steady and full of certainty, "is just the beginning. I know without a doubt that together there is nothing we can't accomplish. No dream is too big for us." Lizette smiled, her heart so full it felt like it could burst. At that moment, with the firelight dancing across the room and Luke's loving gaze locked with hers, she knew deep down in her soul that her future was limitless. The world was full of possibilities, and she was ready to seize every single one. With Luke beside her, she had the strength to face anything life threw her way. As the weeks passed, Lizette continued to excel in her studies. She poured herself into her work with a fervor that left her professors not just impressed, but deeply inspired. Her dedication was palpable, her intelligence undeniable, and her peers began to look at her with a new level of respect. She had transformed not just into an exemplary student, but into a leader, a woman who commanded the admiration of everyone around her. Her professors often singled her out as an example of what was possible with hard work, passion, and perseverance. But it wasn't just in the classroom that Lizette was thriving. The little shop she and Luke had built from the ground up, Coffee and Letters, had grown into something much more than a business. It had become a community hub, a warm and welcoming haven for anyone seeking a quiet moment of reflection, a good book, or simply a conversation over a cup of coffee. Customers who had been with them since the beginning watched with joy as the shop flourished, and new faces were drawn in by the cozy atmosphere and the palpable love that seemed to fill every corner. It wasn't just a shop, it was an extension of who Lizette and Luke were: kind, generous, always ready to give more of themselves than was ever asked. Together, they had become pillars of the community. People spoke of them with admiration, not just because of their success, but because of their kindness. They gave back to the community that had supported them, offering free books to children, hosting small events for local artists and authors, and always making time to listen to the stories of those who walked through their doors. Lizette had found her place in the world, and it was more beautiful than she had ever imagined. One evening, after a particularly busy day, Lizette and Luke locked up the shop as the golden hues of the setting sun painted the sky in warm, glowing colors. The day had been full, but as they stood together outside the doors of Coffee and Letters, the air felt different. It was thick with anticipation, as if something big, something life-changing was about to happen. "Lizette," Luke said, his voice filled with quiet excitement, "would you like to take a walk with me?" If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 4 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. Curious, Lizette smiled and took his hand. Together they walked through the quiet streets, the cool night air a refreshing contrast to the warmth of the day. Luke led her to a small park nearby, one they often visited when they wanted to unwind and talk. The familiar path wound around a serene pond, and the trees swayed gently in the breeze, their leaves rustling softly. "It's so peaceful here," Lizette whispered, taking a deep breath and letting the tranquility of the moment wash over her. "It is," Luke agreed, his tone unusually serious as they approached the large, weathered oak tree they had always loved. The old tree stood tall, its branches sprawling out above them, casting long shadows in the fading light. As they stopped under the tree, Luke turned to face her, his expression a mix of nervousness and resolve. Lizette could feel her heart start to race, sensing that something important was about to unfold. "Lizette," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "from the moment we reconnected, I knew there was something extraordinary between us. What started as a rekindled friendship grew into the most beautiful, meaningful love I've ever known. We've been through so much together, and every day with you has been a gift I never expected." Lizette's breath caught in her throat as her heart raced with a mix of excitement, love, and anticipation. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, and yet she was utterly present, hanging on his every word. "Luke," she started, but before she could finish, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, velvet box. Her eyes widened in disbelief as he dropped to one knee, his hand trembling slightly as he opened the box to reveal a stunning ring that sparkled even in the dim light. Time seemed to stand still as she looked down at Luke, her heart pounding, her mind swirling with emotions. Tears welled up in her eyes as the enormity of the moment sank in. This wasn't just a proposal, it was the culmination of everything they had built together, every dream, every challenge, every triumph. "Lisette," Luke said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes, "will you marry me?" For a moment, she could hardly breathe. The world had shrunk down to this one perfect moment, the man she loved on one knee, offering her not just a ring, but a lifetime of love, partnership, and endless possibilities. With tears streaming down her face, Lisette nodded, her voice barely a whisper, as she choked out the words that would change her life forever. "Lisette, I love you more than words could ever express. You are my partner, my best friend, and I can't imagine my life without you. Will you marry me?" "Ah." Luke's voice trembled with emotion as he gazed up at Lisette, his eyes full of love and anticipation. Lisette felt the weight of those words hit her heart like a wave, filling every corner of her being with overwhelming joy. Tears welled up in her eyes, and for a moment, the world around them seemed to blur. All she could see was Luke, the man who had been her constant, her anchor, her everything. Without a second of hesitation, Lisette nodded, her voice trembling but filled with certainty as she whispered, "Yes, Luke, yes, I will marry you." In that instant, time seemed to stand still. Luke rose to his feet and pulled her into a tight embrace, his arms wrapping around her as if he could protect her from anything the world might throw their way. They stood like that for a moment, hearts beating in unison, as the magnitude of their shared commitment sunk in. When they finally parted, Luke gently took her hand and slipped the ring onto her finger, the small band gleaming in the soft evening light. It was a simple gesture, but in that moment it felt like the entire universe had shifted for them both. The moment was perfect, suspended in time, a memory they both knew they would treasure forever. Hand in hand, they walked back to the store, their hearts lighter than they had ever been. The future was suddenly clearer, more certain, and filled with endless possibilities. The night air was cool and calming as they entered Coffee and Letters, the cozy warmth of their shop enveloping them like a haven. Later that evening, as they sat together in their private corner of the shop, Lisette shared her thoughts with Luke. She spoke of how the moment had filled her with a sense of peace and clarity, how it felt like everything in her life had led to this point. Luke listened intently, his gaze never leaving hers, his heart swelling with pride and admiration. "I'm so proud of you," Luke said softly, pulling her into a gentle hug. "You've shown so much strength and resilience in everything you faced. You're incredible." "Nay." Lisette leaned into him, her heart full of gratitude. "Thank you, Luke. I don't think I could have done any of this without you by my side. You make everything seem easier, more possible. I'm ready to move forward with you and to enjoy everything life has to offer." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a soft golden glow over the shop's small garden, Lisette and Luke sat together in silence, contemplating the future. They both knew with unwavering certainty that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, with love as their compass and support as their foundation. In that peaceful moment, they dreamed of the life they would build, a life full of hope, success, and boundless joy. The months that followed flew by in a whirlwind of excitement and progress. Coffee and Letters had become more than just a business. It was a beloved fixture of the community, a place where people gathered to connect, share stories, and savor the carefully curated coffee blends that Lisette and Luke had perfected. Their hard work had paid off, and the shop's success was undeniable. Expansion plans were well underway, with a second location in the works, and every day brought new growth opportunities. Their relationship, too, flourished. Every shared victory, every challenge they overcame together, only strengthened the bond between them. Their love was no longer just a feeling, it had become the foundation of everything they built, the cornerstone of their shared dreams. One day, as they prepared for a special event at their second store. Lizette and Luke decided to throw a celebration that would bring together all their friends and loyal customers. It was a night to celebrate their success and thank the community that had supported them along the way. The store was alive with energy, soft lights twinkled overhead, and the air was filled with the scent of fresh flowers and the warm aroma of coffee. There was live music, poetry readings, and tastings of their latest coffee blends, each moment more magical than the last. The evening was perfect. Guests filled the store, laughter and conversation flowed freely, and Lizette and Luke stood at the heart of it all, welcoming everyone with open arms and bright smiles. But just as Lizette stepped into the back to grab some additional supplies, she found herself face to face with someone she hadn't expected to see, Dash. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a brief moment she was speechless. It had been so long since she had seen him, and the surprise of his presence left her feeling unsettled. Dash, too, looked uncomfortable, clearly caught off guard. Lizette, Dash began, his voice tense as he tried to sound casual. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Neither did I," Dash, Lizette replied, her tone measured as she tried to steady herself. "What brings you here?" She didn't have any personal issues with him, but his unexpected appearance left her wary. She couldn't help but worry that he might bring negativity to what was otherwise a perfect night. "I just came to check out the event," Dash explained, his voice a little too friendly. "I've heard a lot about your shop and wanted to see how much it's grown." Lizette nodded, still unsure how to feel about his presence. She didn't want the encounter to cast a shadow over the evening, but there was a tension in the air that made her uneasy. Before she could respond, Luke appeared at her side, his expression calm but protective. "Hello," Dash. Luke greeted him with a polite smile, his tone firm yet cordial as he took Lizette's hand in a subtle gesture of reassurance. "How's it going?" "Wayne." Dash shifted uncomfortably, clearly sensing the subtle protectiveness in Luke's demeanor. "It's going well," he said, glancing between the two of them. "Congratulations on everything you've accomplished. The shop is impressive." "Thank you," Luke replied, his grip on Lizette's hand tightening slightly. "We've worked hard to build this together. It's been quite a journey." There was a moment of silence, charged with unspoken tension. Lizette glanced up at Luke, her heart swelling with gratitude. He was always there, steady, supportive, and fiercely protective of what they had built together. Whatever discomfort Dash's arrival had brought, she knew they could handle it, just as they had handled every other challenge that had come their way. As the evening continued, Lizette and Luke found themselves surrounded by friends, love, and the warmth of a community that had embraced them. And in that moment, as the music played softly in the background and the laughter of their guests filled the air, Lizette knew that no matter what, they would always have each other. Together, they could face anything the world had in store for them. The conversation with Dash dissolved into an uneasy silence, and after a tense moment, he turned and walked away, blending into the crowd as he explored the store. Lizette felt a rush of emotions lingering in the air, but Luke's presence grounded her, his warm hand reassuringly intertwined with hers. "Are you okay?" Luke asked, his voice is soft but full of concern, his eyes searching hers for any trace of discomfort. "Yes, it was unexpected, but I'm fine," Lizette said, mustering a smile that grew with confidence. "We've built something beautiful together. I won't let this moment tarnish it." She squeezed his hand tightly, her determination clear in her gaze. Luke gave her a tender smile, the tension in his face easing. The night carried on without further incidents, and the event flourished into a resounding success. The shop buzzed with laughter, music, and the soft hum of friendly conversations. Lizette found herself swept up in the joy of the moment, proud of everything they had achieved. Despite the earlier encounter with Dash, she realized how far she had come. She had transformed her life, overcome so much, and now stood in the center of a world filled with love, purpose, and success, with Luke always by her side. As the evening wound down and the last of their guests filtered out, Lizette and Luke finally stole a quiet moment together. They slipped out onto the small terrace behind the shop, where the night air was cool and crisp. The stars twinkled overhead, casting a gentle glow over the city. Today was an amazing night, despite the surprise, Lizette murmured, leaning her head against Luke's strong shoulder. "It was," Luke agreed, wrapping an arm around her. "And I'm so proud of you, Lizette. You've handled everything with such grace, such strength. I don't know how you do it." Lizette smiled, a soft laugh escaping her. "It's because of you, Luke. You make it all easier. No matter what happens, I know we'll face it together." They stood in comfortable silence, gazing up at the stars. The peace of the night wrapped around them like a soft blanket. And in that moment, all the trials and tribulations of the past seemed far away. The future stretched before them, full of possibility and hope. And more than anything, they knew that as long as they had each other, they could weather any storm. Later, as they prepared for bed, Lisette reflected on her journey. She had faced countless challenges, endured heartache, and navigated a winding road full of uncertainties. But through it all, she had discovered her inner strength. And in Luke, she had found the love of her life. She smiled as she curled into Luke's arms, feeling the warmth of his embrace and the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. Despite the unexpected moments and the trials they had faced, Lisette knew that their future would be bright. The certainty of their love, of their partnership, made each day worthwhile. With that thought, she drifted into a peaceful sleep, her heart full and her spirit content. But while Lisette and Luke enjoyed the success of their night and the tranquility of their life together, Dash found himself falling deeper into a dark and turbulent place. Despite months of therapy, the wounds of his past and his poor decisions refused to heal. Each session with his therapist seemed to pull those wounds wider open, and instead of finding peace, Dash felt increasingly lost, like a man drowning in the very waters he had hoped would cleanse him. Therapy had forced him to confront his past mistakes, to acknowledge the damage he had caused to himself and others. But instead of clarity and healing, what he found was an unrelenting wave of guilt, shame, and regret. The pain of his decisions clung to him, and he struggled to free himself from its suffocating grip. As much as he tried to embrace change, his inner demons clung to him, whispering in the quiet moments, leading him back to destructive patterns. Seeing Lisette and Luke together at coffee and letters had been like salt in an open wound. Their happiness, their success, it was everything he felt he had lost, and the sight of it was unbearable. The life they had built was the life he felt had slipped through his fingers, and jealousy gnawed at him, turning his admiration into a bitter cocktail of resentment and anger. Despite his efforts to change, Dash couldn't shake the feeling that everything good had been stolen from him and turned into someone else's perfect existence. That feeling festered within him, growing like a shadow that darkened his every thought. Therapy, instead of easing his mind, began to fuel his desire for retribution. The more he confronted his past, the more he blamed Lisette for moving on, and for finding happiness when he was still trapped in his misery. He knew it was irrational, but the anger inside him felt unstoppable, like a fire that consumed everything in its path. One afternoon, after a particularly intense therapy session, Dash left the therapist's office feeling more unhinged than ever. His mind was in turmoil, his emotions a swirling storm of pain, rage, and hopelessness. He wandered through the city, his thoughts circling back to the same place again and again: Lisette and Luke. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 5 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. Every step he took, every corner he turned, felt like another reminder of the life he had lost. The laughter of couples passing by, the sight of people gathered at cafes, everything seemed to mock him, reminding him of the happiness he no longer had. His thoughts grew darker, more twisted, as he imagined their perfect life continuing without him, as though his presence had never mattered. The need for revenge began to consume him, a quiet voice in the back of his mind whispering that he couldn't let them win. His sense of loss and failure clouded any rational thought, and soon, all he could think about was confronting Lisette and Luke, disrupting their happiness the way he had been shattered. As the day turned into night, Dash's footsteps carried him, almost unconsciously, toward coffee and letters. He stood across the street from the shop, watching as the lights inside flickered warmly, casting a golden glow on the people gathered inside. His hands clenched into fists as a wave of bitterness washed over him. He wasn't sure what he was going to do, but he knew he couldn't walk away, not this time. Lisette and Luke's joy stood in stark contrast to the darkness he felt inside, and in that moment, Dash made a decision, one that would change everything. As Lisette stood before the mirror, her heart fluttered with a mixture of anticipation and joy. Her reflection stared back at her, capturing the radiant glow in her eyes, the soft curve of her smile, and the subtle elegance of her wedding dress, which seemed to perfectly mirror the purity of her love for Luke. It was a moment she had dreamed of for so long, a day she had worked so hard to reach. And yet, as the excitement buzzed in her chest, a shadow of unease crept into her thoughts. Dash's words, unsettling and ominous, lingered at the back of her mind. Sully, her ever-supportive maid of honor, sensed the slight shift in Lisette's expression and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Lizette, you look stunning. You've made it through everything, the challenges, the doubts, the hard times. Today is all about you and Luke. Enjoy it, and don't let anything cast a shadow on this moment." Lizette nodded, swallowing the nervous lump in her throat. "Thank you, Sully. I couldn't have made it here without you or Luke. I can't shake this strange feeling." Dash showed up again, and I'm worried he might. She stopped, shaking her head as if to dispel the thought. "I don't want to give it any more space in my mind. Today is about love, not fear." Sully gave her an encouraging smile. "Exactly. You and Luke have built something beautiful. Whatever Dash thinks he can do, it doesn't matter. You have everything you need to protect each other." The warmth of Sully's words comforted Lizette, and she took a deep breath, allowing herself to focus on the joy of the day. The sun streamed through the window, casting golden rays across the room as Lizette's friends and family began to gather outside for the ceremony. The day, as perfect as the weather, held the promise of a new beginning. Outside, Luke stood by the altar, his heart racing with a mix of excitement and overwhelming love. He couldn't wait to see Lizette walk down the aisle, to finally call her his wife. His thoughts, too, wandered briefly to Dash's unsettling appearance at the shop, but he brushed it off. He wasn't going to let anything ruin this day for them. The garden, bathed in sunlight and filled with the sweet scent of blooming flowers, was a picture of perfection. Friends and family filled the seats and soft music played in the background, adding a serene soundtrack to the anticipation. Luke glanced toward the pathway that Lizette would soon walk, his heart skipping a beat as he imagined her stepping into view. But as Lizette made her final preparations inside, unaware of the growing tension outside, Dash lingered at the edges of the event, hidden from view. His mind, still twisted by resentment and pain, couldn't bear the sight of their happiness. The picturesque scene, the guests, the laughter, the beauty of it all only fueled his bitterness. He had watched from a distance for days, learning every detail of their plans, waiting for the right moment to disrupt it all. It wasn't fair, Dash thought, his anger simmering beneath the surface. "How can they be so happy while I'm left to drown in my misery?" His mind raced as he formulated his next move, each thought darker than the last. He didn't care about the consequences anymore. He was consumed by the need to make them feel the pain he had lived with for so long. As Lizette made her way toward the ceremony, her heart swelled with love and anticipation. The sun's warmth kissed her skin, and the soft breeze carried with it the scent of fresh flowers. She felt Luke's presence even before she saw him, knowing that in just moments they would stand together and exchange the vows that would bind them for life. Nothing, she told herself, could take this happiness away. But as she reached the garden, a commotion stirred in the distance. Murmurs spread through the crowd as Dash, having finally decided to act, stepped out of the shadows and into view. His presence was like a jolt of electricity through the serene setting, a dark cloud over an otherwise perfect day. Lizette's heart dropped as she saw him approach, her mind racing. Luke, immediately sensing the tension, moved to stand between Lizette and Dash, his expression firm and protective. "What do you want?" Dash Luke asked, his voice calm but laced with warning. Dash's eyes darted between Luke and Lizette, his face a mix of bitterness and anguish. "You think you can just move on with your perfect life and leave me in the dust?" he spat, his voice trembling with emotion. "I've lost everything, and you two get to have it all. That's not fair." Lizette stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. "Dash, this isn't the way to find peace. Whatever you're feeling, it doesn't have to be like this. We've all made mistakes, but you don't have to let them control you." Dash's face twisted in frustration. "It's easy for you to say that when you're the one who came out on top," he snapped, his voice rising. "I wanted a different life, Lizette. I wanted a chance to make things right, but every time I try, it just gets worse." Luke's eyes never left Dash, his protective instinct kicking in. "This isn't the place, Dash. You need to leave. This is our wedding, and we won't let you destroy it." For a moment, Dash seemed to falter, his anger wavering as he looked at the faces around him, faces filled with love and support for Lizette and Luke. He had expected confrontation, but seeing them surrounded by people who cared, who stood by them, made him feel more isolated than ever. The weight of his actions began to settle in, and he realized that even in his desire for revenge, he was truly alone. Without another word, Dash turned and walked away, disappearing into the distance. The tension in the air slowly dissipated, and Lizette and Luke stood together, stronger than ever in the face of the disruption. Luke wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close as they both took a deep breath. "It's over," Luke whispered, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "He's not going to take this moment from us." Lizette nodded, her heart racing but full of love. "I know. We're going to be okay." As the guests returned to their seats, the ceremony resumed, and the beauty of the day returned. With renewed determination, Lizette and Luke faced each other at the altar, their love stronger and more resilient than ever. They exchanged their vows, promising to stand by each other through every challenge, every joy, and every uncertainty that life might bring. In the end, their love triumphed over the darkness that had threatened it. As the sun set on their wedding day, casting a golden glow over the garden, Lizette and Luke knew that no matter what, their future together would be bright, full of hope, and fortified by the strength of the love they shared. Meanwhile, Luke stood at the altar, dressed in a classic suit that perfectly complemented the joy and anticipation he felt in his heart. Surrounded by his closest friends, each offering words of encouragement, his excitement only grew. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the culmination of everything he and Lizette had shared, dreamed of, and built together. His mind raced, filled with images of their future, a life full of love and happiness. The ceremony was about to begin. The guests, all smiles and excitement, took their seats in the picturesque garden, which had been lovingly adorned with delicate white flowers and softly glowing candles. The air was filled with the soft strains of music, a gentle melody that seemed to weave through the blooming trees and lush greenery, setting the perfect tone for the day. Luke stood at the altar, eyes trained on the pathway, knowing that any moment now Lizette would appear. And then she did arm in arm with her father, walking down the aisle. For Luke, time seemed to slow. When their eyes met, everything else faded away. It was as if the world had disappeared, leaving only the two of them, bound by an unspoken understanding of the depth and truth of their love. Lizette was breathtaking, and in her eyes, Luke saw their entire journey, the challenges, the triumphs, and the unwavering love that had brought them to this moment. The officiant began to speak, his words rich with meaning, hope, and the promise of a bright future together. Everything was perfect, almost surreal in its beauty. But then, suddenly, a murmur spread through the guests. The quiet rustle of confusion and surprise rose as all heads turned toward an unwelcome figure making his way through the crowd. He was uninvited and arrived with a defiant expression, his presence shattering the serenity of the moment. "Stop this wedding!" shouted, his voice cutting through the peaceful atmosphere like a knife. All eyes were now on him, and an uncomfortable tension gripped the gathering. Lizette and Luke exchanged a glance, their faces a mix of surprise and concern, unsure of what Dash's next move might be. Dash, visibly upset and trembling with emotion, stood at the front of the aisle, staring directly at Lizette. His voice was thick with resentment as he spoke. "Lizette, how can you marry him after everything we've been through? Everyone here needs to know the truth about her." A heavy silence fell over the crowd, thick with discomfort and confusion. Lizette could feel her heart race as a flood of emotions rushed through her: shock, anxiety, and a sudden wave of old pain. But before she could say a word, Luke stepped forward, his stance firm and protective as he placed himself between Dash and Lizette. Luke began, his voice steady and commanding despite the tension in the air. "This is a day of love and celebration. You have no right to be here or to try to ruin this moment for us." Dash scoffed, his bitterness apparent. "Love? Celebration? Lizette, do you think you can just start fresh without acknowledging what you did?" Lizette, taking a deep breath, knew it was time to confront the past once and for all. With Luke by her side, she stepped forward, her voice calm yet resolute. She was done letting old wounds dictate her present. "Dash," she began, her tone steady and clear, "I have faced my mistakes. I've worked hard to confront my past, and today I stand here to celebrate a new beginning, not just for me, but for Luke and everyone who has supported and loved us. What we've built together is real, and nothing you say or do can take that away from us." The tension hung heavy in the air as the guests remained silent, watching intently. Lizette turned toward Luke, her hand finding his, and then looked back at Dash, her gaze unwavering. "I forgive you, Dash," she said, her voice soft but filled with strength. "Not for you, but for myself. I refuse to let bitterness or resentment define me or this day. Today is about love and hope, and I won't let you destroy that." Dash stood there, stunned into silence. He hadn't expected this: Lizette's calmness, her grace. Her words cut through his anger, leaving him momentarily speechless. The guests began to murmur once again, but this time it was with approval. They could feel the strength in Lizette's words, the power in her ability to rise above. Seeing that Dash had no further argument, Lizette's father and a few of Luke's friends stepped forward, signaling that it was time for him to leave. Dash, realizing he had lost whatever control he thought he had, hesitated for a moment before turning and walking out of the garden. His figure slowly faded into the distance, swallowed by the trees, leaving the ceremony in peace once more. With the disruption behind them, the officiant took a deep breath and after a brief pause resumed the ceremony. True love, he began again, his voice rich with emotion, is not just a feeling but a commitment. It is the strength to face any obstacle, to rise above any challenge, and to do so together. Today we have witnessed that strength in Lisette and Luke. Luke turned to face Lisette, his eyes full of admiration, love, and pride. She met his gaze with equal intensity, the bond between them only strengthened by what had just occurred. Together they had faced down the past, and now they were ready to embrace their future, unafraid. The rest of the ceremony unfolded in beauty and joy, as Lisette and Luke exchanged their vows, promising to love, support, and cherish each other through every high and low. The garden seemed to glow with the warmth of their commitment. The guests watched with renewed admiration, knowing they were witnessing not just a wedding, but the union of two souls who had weathered life's storms together and come out stronger on the other side. When the officiant finally pronounced them husband and wife, the air was filled with applause, cheers, and the soft scent of flowers carried by the breeze. Lisette and Luke kissed under the canopy of trees, their hearts lighter and their love unshakable. As the sun set and the celebration continued into the night, there was no doubt in anyone's mind, Lisette and Luke's love was the kind that could withstand anything, a beacon of hope, strength, and resilience. And though shadows had briefly fallen over their day, their light had shone through, more powerful and enduring than ever. As they walked through the park, the sun gently filtering through the trees, Lisette pushed Matthew's stroller while Luke walked beside them. The moment was peaceful, the kind of quiet joy they had grown to cherish as a family. Matthew, now a year old, babbled happily, his chubby little hands reaching out to grasp the soft breeze. Luke stopped for a moment, turning to face Lisette with a warm smile, his eyes filled with admiration. "You know," he said, his voice tender, "I sometimes stop and think about how far we've come. Everything we've built, everything we've overcome, it feels like a dream I never want to wake up from." Lisette looked back at him, her heart swelling with love and gratitude. "I know exactly what you mean," she replied, stepping closer to him. "There were times when I wasn't sure we would make it through all the challenges. But here we are, stronger than ever, with this little miracle in our lives." She glanced down at Matthew, who gave a soft giggle as if understanding the moment. Luke chuckled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You've always been my strength, Lisette. Every step we've taken together. I'm so proud of everything we've accomplished, our stores, our home, and especially our family." Lisette's eyes softened, and she leaned into Luke's embrace. "I'm proud of us too, Luke. We've built something beautiful out of love, perseverance, and trust. And now, with Matthew, it feels like everything has come full circle." The two of them stood there for a moment, soaking in the simple yet profound joy of their lives. The years had tested them in ways they hadn't expected, but every challenge had only made their bond stronger. Lisette could hardly believe how much her life had transformed from the uncertainties of her past to the beautiful, fulfilled life she shared with Luke and Matthew. After a few more moments of quiet reflection, they continued their stroll, the park filled with the laughter of children and the soft rustling of leaves. Lisette and Luke spoke about their plans for the future, expanding their stores even further, creating new experiences for their customers, and maybe even adding another little one to their family shortly. As they walked, Lisette couldn't help but think of how the journey to this point had been anything but straightforward. There had been moments of doubt, fear, and pain. But looking at Luke and Matthew, she knew that every struggle had been worth it. The love they shared, the life they had built together, was more than she had ever dreamed of. It was real, tangible, and full of hope for the future. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 6 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. Meanwhile, back in his new city, Dash had continued to walk his path toward healing. The turning point at Lisette's wedding had marked a profound moment of self-realization for him. He had faced the worst parts of himself, the parts that had driven him to nearly destroy not only his life, but the lives of those he had cared about. Therapy had become more than just a tool for him, it was a lifeline, a way to break free from the destructive patterns that had ruled his life for so long. Over time, Dash began to piece together a new vision for his future. He found solace in the small victories, rebuilding relationships, finding meaningful work, and, most importantly forgiving himself for his past mistakes. Though the memories of his old life lingered, they no longer defined him. He had learned to accept his flaws and move forward with hope, no longer seeking validation from others but finding it within himself. Moving to a new city had been the fresh start he needed. There, in a place where no one knew him or the mistakes he had made, he felt free to build something honest. His new job brought a sense of purpose, and slowly, Dash found himself surrounded by people who respected him for who he was now, not who he had been before. Though he still carried the weight of his past, it no longer burdened him in the same way. The anger had dissipated, replaced by a quiet resolve to live a better life. One evening after a long day of work, Dash sat by the window of his small apartment, looking out at the cityscape. He felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in years, of feeling that perhaps he was finally on the right path. And though he would never forget the mistakes he had made, he had found a way to move forward with hope, something he once thought impossible. Back in their hometown, Lizette and Luke continued to thrive, not only in their family life but in their business ventures. Coffee and Letters had expanded to several cities, each new store reflecting the warmth and unique charm that had made their original shop such a beloved staple in the community. Lizette's leadership had grown even stronger, her vision for the business clear and inspiring. She had become a respected figure in the business world, admired for her intelligence, creativity, and commitment to staying true to her values. Luke, ever the steady presence in their lives, managed the business with the same care and attention that had guided them from the beginning. Together, they formed a dynamic duo, and their love for each other was reflected in the way they ran their business. Every decision they made was grounded in their shared belief in kindness, community, and the importance of creating spaces where people could come together. As Matthew grew, so did their dreams. Lizette and Luke talked often about their hopes for the future, for their family, and for the legacy they wanted to leave behind. Their lives were busy, filled with the demands of running a growing business and raising a young child, but they always made time for each other. They had learned the importance of balance, of prioritizing the things that truly mattered. And in the quiet moments like their strolls through the park or their evenings spent under the stars, Lizette and Luke would look at each other and smile, knowing that no matter what came next, they would face it together. Their love had been tested, but it had emerged stronger, more resilient, and more beautiful than ever. They had built a life full of love, hope, and happiness, and they knew without a doubt that they would continue to do so for the rest of their days. "Do you realize everything we've accomplished together?" Luke asked softly, his voice filled with awe as he knelt holding Matthew's hand. Their son, with wide eyes full of wonder, was taking his first steps, his little feet wobbling but determined. It was a milestone, one that felt like the culmination of all the love, patience, and hope that had built the foundation of their family. Lizette, standing beside them, watched with her heart overflowing. Her face lit up with a radiant smile, the kind that spoke of contentment and deep fulfillment. "Yes," she replied, her voice soft but full of emotion, "and I wouldn't change anything about our journey. Every difficult moment, every challenge we faced, brought us to this exact place, a place of love, happiness, and so much possibility." Luke rose to his feet and kissed her gently, their lips meeting in a quiet moment of understanding and shared joy. As they pulled away, they both looked at Matthew, who continued to explore his world with boundless curiosity and excitement. They could see the future unfolding in the small but profound steps their son took, a reminder that life was always moving forward, full of discoveries and dreams. They stood there, side by side, their hands intertwined, watching Matthew take in the world. At that moment, they knew that no matter what the future held, whether it brought new challenges or more triumphs, they would face it together. Their love had proven to be unbreakable, a bond that had grown stronger through every trial they had encountered. They had weathered storms and embraced victories, always with the same resilience and devotion that had brought them together in the first place. Life, they knew, was a continuous journey, full of moments of pure joy and unexpected trials. But they had found in each other not only a life partner, but a true love that sustained them and inspired them to grow, to be better every day. Lizette and Luke had built a life rooted in trust, perseverance, and unwavering support. Every step they took, whether in their business or in raising their family, was a step taken together. As they stood watching Matthew, his laughter filling the air as he toddled toward a patch of flowers, Lizette felt a deep sense of peace. Their future stretched out before them like a beautiful horizon, full of endless possibilities and opportunities for growth. And while the road ahead would undoubtedly have its ups and downs, they were ready for whatever life might throw at them, because they had each other. Together, they would continue building a life of love, hope, and success, confident that whatever came next, they would face it hand in hand. Lisette and Luc had proven time and again that their love could weather any storm, and as they moved forward into the unknown, they did so with a deep sense of trust and an unshakable bond that would carry them through all of life's adventures. In the quiet moments, in the laughter of their son, and in the shared dreams they continued to nurture, Lisette and Luc knew that they were exactly where they were meant to be. And with each new day, they would keep moving forward, embracing the journey with love, hope, and the certainty that, no matter what, they would always have each other. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey through Lisette and Luc's story. From the trials they faced to the triumphs they celebrated, we've seen a powerful testament to the strength of love, perseverance, and partnership. Their journey reminds us that no matter the obstacles we encounter, facing them together with unwavering support can lead to profound and lasting happiness. We'd love to hear from you. What have you learned from Lisette and Luc's journey that resonates with you? Share in the comments below one lesson you've taken away and how you plan to apply it in your own life. If you enjoyed this video, please leave your comment below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Your support means the world to us and helps us continue bringing you inspiring stories and content. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video.